So yesterday we had that Animal Crossing Direct where they went over a bunch of new content and DLC that was going to be heading to the game, but something odd happened. Certainly something that people weren't expecting. We found out a whole lot more about the Nintendo Switch Online service plus expansion pack. Specifically, we found out how much it was going to cost and also an added benefit that was going to be coming along with it that was previously unannounced. And well, there were some reactions online. I wanted to go over this here today and how Nintendo seems to have kind of shifted away from, I believe, what their original intent was with the Nintendo Switch Online service. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So first things first, let's head over here to the Nintendo Switch Online service website that they have set up. Just goes over all the information because they did update it after the Direct. Now, we were going through the Direct, and it was, of course, new content heading to Animal Crossing. And during this time, they showed off downloadable content that was going to be sold separately from the game. And it seemed substantial. Like, it did appear that there was a lot of new content and features heading to the game, which is great because I know people who still play that game we're talking about how it just feels like Nintendo kind of forgot about it, and then here they are now with a big information blowout and new content coming in a couple of weeks, actually, right at the beginning of November. But then they went into this Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack information, going over the fact that that Animal Crossing downloadable content, that being the Happy Home Paradise, will be a part of the expansion pack, meaning that downloadable content could be added in alongside of Nintendo 64 and Sega Genesis games. Then we got to the pricing. So far, everyone was pretty happy with the idea of that. Wow, we're going to have DLC at times added in. Well, the pricing, unfortunately, didn't go over as well. We can see on the left here, this is the base Nintendo Switch Online service at $20 for the entire year. They also have this family membership, which is funny because then we're basically getting to the point where it's like, if you got to divide it up between friends or the family, you have this. It's basically saying, well, we'd like you to pay $20, but we know the value may not be there overall for a household or a group of friends even. So you can just kind of split it up amongst yourselves with this amount. But then we have the individual membership for the Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack. It does not appear that Nintendo is going to be offering a 1 month or a 3 month, anything like that. It's just the 12-month option at $50. So you look at that and you're like, wow, they more than doubled the price. My initial thought was they would go $10 to $15 more. So we go to $30 or $35 for this expansion pack edition. And the Nintendo 64 games were going to be added, and that's what most people cared about. The Genesis games were kind of out of left field, but they showed Banjo-Kazooie, essentially meaning that they had Microsoft involved. We saw the Sega Genesis games, meaning that Sega's involved in. It was kind of brought up at one point during the podcast after this happened that there are a lot of other companies that are going to be looking for money from this service, right, to license some of these games and properties. Could that mean that the price ends up coming in higher than we're expecting? And, well, yeah, that seems to be what happened here. Now, the one good thing about this is it is completely optional. You don't need to buy into the 64 stuff to play online. If that was the case, kind of like what happened with Xbox Live a little while ago where they tried to double the price and you needed to pay that amount or you couldn't play some of your games online, that would be a problem. This is kind of just a content pack, or as they say, an expansion pack tacked on where you have access to Nintendo 64 and Sega Genesis games. The DLC stuff is it's odd because I kind of think Nintendo is setting up some issues in the future here. They're starting to make people, I guess, believe that, wow, a bunch of DLC could be added in. It almost feels like the Animal Crossing thing was just sort of tacked on there, and they're like, oh, we got to make this at least feel like it's worth a bit more. $50 is quite the ask. Let's throw in that Animal Crossing DLC. It's new. It's not even out yet, and if you're signed up in 10 days, this will be out 9 days, about on the 25th. You'll be ready to go there. Animal Crossing fans will probably look into this, but the issue there is you have to remain subscribed to the online service to have full access to that DLC. Some smaller parts you'll still have access to, but for the vast majority of the content, you have to stay a member of this higher tier, whereas Animal Crossing fans will probably just buy the DLC because they're already so invested in that game. Why wouldn't you just pick up the DLC to go along with it for what, $20 or $25 more? So now I wonder if going forward, people are going to expect more DLC to be added. They could go back and get older downloadable content from some games and just kind of throw it in, like Breath of the Wild. Why not? The newer one is coming up here, we assume, next year. Why not go get the other DLC, right, that we had released for Breath of the Wild and just put it on this service to remind people, hey, if you haven't played Breath of the Wild yet for some reason, you should go check it out. And that downloadable content is already part of this higher tier that you pay for, so you get everything ready to go already. But there is the possibility that we get to a point where Nintendo is still coming out with DLC and it's not being added here. That's kind of a mixed message that they've sort of set up, and an expectation that, of course, would be leading to disappointment. Now, I will say, looking at what Nintendo's doing here with their online service, it started, to me anyway, as just that, an online service, because they realized, wow, Microsoft and Sony are charging to play online. We have not done that yet. Let's try doing it with the Switch. They wanted to charge $20 a year, and it was pretty obvious that they weren't going to be ready to go with some basic features and an overall ecosystem that would be worth the money on its own, much like we have with Xbox Live and PlayStation Plus. Sure, they do give games to you every month, but they don't necessarily stick around, as in you have a certain window to claim it and then it'll stick around. So if Nintendo had shown up, to me anyway, with something that was at least passable, like comparable to the original Xbox even, or the 360 when it first launched, they would probably have been able to charge $30 a year and gotten away with it fine, because people are already conditioned to pay $60 a year for consoles with the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series now for just basic online functionality, or what we've come to expect from basic functionality with those systems. Instead, what Nintendo has done is they appear to have veered off in the idea of building their Game Pass or Netflix-like service with all these games being added, and they just kind of have the online requirement tacked on. I mean, really think about how much has Nintendo actually improved the basic online service with that $20 tier since the launch of the Switch. They really haven't done a lot. They've played around with the idea of game invites, for example, but really, you still can't even send messages to friends on your list. I mean, how many people still open up the Nintendo Switch online application, or even have ever opened it up to do voice chat? It's kind of the basic things that you look at and go, wow, if Nintendo had just been able to release their online service with some of this ready to go, we probably wouldn't be in a situation where they are essentially propping up their online service with these older legacy games. I will say this. There are going to be people who look at this and say, wow, that's kind of cool. You can play Mario Kart 64 online with friends. It does play at a higher resolution, right? It's access to the older library that Nintendo has without having to go online and, yes, download ROMs and all of this. I know not everyone likes to do that or want to get into that. Sure, so I'm not saying there's not value here. There clearly is value for the pricing when you look up and down this list. You know what the strange thing is to me, though? If that price really was inflated because obviously Sega and Microsoft are involved, why did Nintendo go and get Genesis games? Like, most of those Genesis games are already available multiple times over. In fact, there a lot of them, other than I think like 2 or 3, are available on the Switch now for collection. I think it would have been significantly more impactful for Nintendo if instead of Genesis, it was something like Dreamcast games. Like, let's say they had 10 good Dreamcast games alongside of the Nintendo 64 lineup here, and then that DLC, and it was $30 more. I think there would be less pause than we're seeing online right now and frustration around this pricing, because Sega hasn't really done a lot with their legacy Dreamcast games, and that would be something that people would think, wow, this is pretty unique to Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack. Oh, and I also noticed that Nintendo just happened to open up orders for the N64 and Genesis controller, and the 64 controller sold out very quickly, and wouldn't you know it, they're already up on eBay for like 2.5 times the price. So thanks, scalpers. But anyway, looking at this Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack with that pricing causing quite the sticker shock online, it makes sense to me why it would. It just doesn't seem like Nintendo has worked to build up the Nintendo Switch Online service, much like a lot of us assumed they would when they first introduced it. We've assumed a lot from Nintendo for this generation, probably because of the overwhelming success that the Switch console itself has seen. However, Nintendo just hasn't done a lot with it when it comes to system-level features and their online social features. It's kind of head-scratching at times when you look at how little they've done overall for a platform that's going to be crossing 100 million units either by the end of this year throughout the holidays or like definitely the first quarter of next year. It's going to become Nintendo's most successful console, but it still lacks basic features that their least successful console, the Wii U, had, and it was free at the time to play online. So unfortunately, it seems Nintendo is much more focused on raising the price by including legacy games rather than working to improve the service, and then, yeah, probably raising the price that way. I feel like Nintendo just doesn't want to have to deal with any of this online stuff when it comes to the social features, and they would truly rather build out their own Game Pass or Netflix service. The problem is, it's all tied together, and they did that in the first place with the Switch. You know what, to me, leave the online service behind, leave that on the Switch, just keep it free, and then go off and build this massive Game Pass, Netflix-like service that you could charge substantially more for if the offerings were better, right? Like, what if they branched out and they did have a ton of different systems available here from third parties? Maybe the Dreamcast games, the Saturn games get dropped in there. Maybe they get weird and get the Atari Lynx and the Virtual Boy involved. Then you could do GameCube and the Wii, and all of a sudden it costs the same amount as Game Pass Ultimate, and everyone's much more interested in that offering. But that's kind of where we are with Nintendo Switch Online plus expansion pack. It's to the point where people look at it and just see it as a very expensive option. And I guess that's the one silver lining, is it is an option. But we'll see what Nintendo does to, I guess, build out this service as they go along. We're getting close to the end of the Switch's life, so I'm not expecting a lot. Maybe they'll restart in a year or two when they start a new generation and try again. But based on Nintendo and their history with online, I don't think I'm really going to be holding my breath. But thanks, guys, for watching. Let me know what you think about all of this down below, and I'll see you next time.